You're watching Rogers Community 4, serving Surrey, Langley, and New Westminster.
You have to know somebody if you're going to get a job nowadays in some place. Otherwise, you don't really have a chance.
I'm extremely optimistic about the future of all my children. I believe they have good education prospects, and I believe they live in a great country that's full of opportunity for young people today.
Good evening. Welcome People and Policies, the show that allows you to talk about some of the issues that are important. Tonight we thought about getting some politicians in, but then we thought maybe you have had enough of politicians for a while. Seems like we've had politicians on here every week since the end of September. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some community things of importance. Our guest tonight is Waddy Lehman with the Green Timbers Historical Society, or Heritage Society, and John Thompson, a pioneer planter of the Green Timbers Society. I don't know, John, I said, do you belong to the Heritage Society?
Yes, I do.
Actually,
I'm a life member.
You're a life member. They gave you one of those too. What we've had you two gentlemen come on for is to talk about some more about the Green Timbers. One, because I think a lot of people don't know the history of it. We hear that it should be preserved, and we hear the Heritage Society, but a lot of people don't really know what the heritage is. We'd like to talk about what's happening there now and what the future is. But I'm going to start with Waddy, and my one thing from the election, I promise this will be the only thing I'll ask. What's the understanding, do you think, at this point, of that final quadrant of Green Timbers, the one that's supposed to be, or was supposed to become, apartment blocks at one time, and then people weren't going to do anything? What's your understanding of what's going to happen over there?
Well, that is not exactly a quadrant. It's a 40-acre strip north of 100th Avenue, between 100th Avenue and 101st Avenue, and between 144th Street and 148th Street. It's separated from the main body of Green Timbers by 100th Avenue, which was put through in in the early 80s, I think, and it's separated that very northern part from the other. At the time when it was separated, or it was reclassified in the official community plan as a multifamily residential, and it still stands as that. The reason why I'm not going to go into, but our society has always considered that to be an integral part of the forest, and for a long time, until 1983, it was shown on the maps as part of the Green Timbers Special Study Area, and we'd like it to be reincorporated into that. On October the 5th, Council, after due consideration and going over it with us, going into some of the history in greater detail, decided to pass a motion to preserve that now as park. However, the actual definition or the final decision as to the detailed use is something they want to make the subject of a public meeting sometime during the new year.
Okay, so I said that's the end of the politics.
But it's been it's been a definite step to get the public involved in making a decision on that.
Yes, I said that's as far as politics.
Thank you.
Now we're going to have some fun with the rest of it. I want you gentlemen to take me back 100 years ago. Right now we see Surrey today as basically with some trees here and there, Green Timbers, but apart from that we see a lot of open lands, a lot of farm fields. Take us back 100 years. What was Surrey like?
John, you know more.
Pretty well all trees, I believe. Now, I worked in 1930. I started working for an old farmer. His name was Tom Fallowfield. He lived and worked on his 160 acres down on Coast Meridian Road and the corner of now 168th and 32nd Avenue. He had 160 acres. Now, the only way that he could get into that farm when he came was up the Nicamaga River. There was no other roads available. The Old Yale Road was through, but there was no connecting roads at that time. Like he lived, Fleetwood area would be where the Old Yale Road went through, and he lived way south, and he still had to cross the Serpentine River. So the only way they could get out was to go to Elgin and get on the ferry there and ferry around to wherever they wanted to go. But that was in 1882. That was before the railroad came. that Mr. Fallowfield settled in that, him and his brother. And they're old-time pioneers. But there was no clear land. It was all covered. It was swamp and trees. That was the main thing all over the area. And some of the first farmers in that area were, in a big way, they diked off somehow. Don't ask me how. But they diked off a big piece of the Mud Bay, and that was all
They
cleared
actually
land.
diked off part of Mud
Yes,
Bay?
yeah. And they farmed it at. If you look now and you go down at high tide and you go down the King George Highway, you'll notice that the river is up just as high as the road at high tide, and that, of course, all the land would be flooded. You see, so it was diked off, and they did have farms there before they had farms in the other area.
'Cause I think a lot of people think of that South Surrey area as farming area.
Yeah.
You look at it there, you know,
Yeah.
we drive by the Cloverdale area, and all we see are these miles of farm.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't realize how much importance lumber had really in Surrey in the
yes,
early days.
Yeah. Now all that hill, just south of 32nd Avenue, that was all hauled with oxen, and the logs were hauled down from there, and there was a ditch a mile of, well, went from the Nickalmackel River right up to 32nd Street, and it was a logging ditch, and they had 5 different locks in that ditch, and the load, I think 14 or 12 or 14 yoke of oxen, and they hauled these logs down on a skid road and rolled them into the ditch. And when they got the ditch full, well, they opened the gate and they all flooded down to the next gate, and then they closed the gate and filled it up with logs again. And they transported the logs down this log ditch to the Nickalmackel River, and then they snaked them out and made booms of them out at the mouth of the river.
Tremendous. I don't think anyone would have ever have thought of something like that happening at all.
Now the Chinese that dug the ditch, and they were left over from the railroad crew when the railroad was through. Well, all these 100 Chinese people were there, and they actually were the men that dug the ditch, and it was it was 6 feet deep, and it was at least 8 feet wide at the top, and that's what it was used for.
I heard the same thing. Everyone maybe is driven through Surrey has seen that the Serpentine River in certain places has 2 parts of it. And I'd heard that part of that was dug for the same idea of it.
Well, perhaps it
around
was.
the Sullivan area.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I couldn't say, but I do know about the one down on the Nickalmackel River.
There were several mills as well in Surrey in those days, were there not? Where were some of those? Where were some
Well, there
of
was
them
one at White Rock, of course. There was a big one at White Rock. There was a shingle mill at Tyne Head, and there was a shingle mill at Fort Kells, and there was also, let's see, well, of course, where all the Green Timbers was sawn up, there's a big mill at King's Mill. And that's at Newton. No, it's at King's. That was about a mile north of Newton. The next station towards Westminster from there.
The logging that occurred around the Green Timber areas, how was it carried out?
Well, it was all done with a crosscut saw and an axe. The guys chopped the undercut in with an axe, and then sawed the back with a big saw, drove wedges in, and as soon as the tree started to topple, well, of course, the guy got out of the way. It took
Hopefully got out of the way.
Yeah, I should say, yeah.
I think a lot of us have seen pictures of that.
But they were huge, a lot of huge trees in Surrey. I don't know about some, but our place was on, my father moved down to, and our family moved down to Bear Creek in 1926. And we had stumps on our place that were at least, the big spruces were 7 feet across in diameter, and then we had one fir tree that was 6, but there was all sorts of 5-foot and 4-foot stumps on our place, across diameter. Yeah, and they were cut at about 7 feet above the ground, so their saws would be long enough to, where the tree flares out near the ground. Well, they got up above that. A tremendous amount of wood was lost by doing that.
Oh, I would imagine it would be if you lost the first 6-7 feet of a tree that's 7 feet across.
Yeah, huge.
You have a photograph of one of the bridges, the logging bridges, don't
Yeah, I do have. This is a bridge across Bear Creek that was on our property.
I'll hold it still, and we'll see if we can get a shot. I can't guarantee anything. Okay. So there was actually.
Where do I hold it?
That looks like the type of bridge. Very good. Yeah, that's fine. You can see that came across very well.
Okay.
So that was where?
That was on our place, and it's on the corner of 144th Street and 80th Avenue. And they are just now putting it all into houses.
Right, yeah. I
That we
know the
had
area.
20 acres. A 20-acre block is 660 feet wide and 1,320 feet long. That's an eighth of a mile by a quarter of a mile. That's the size of a piece of ground we had.
But now that looks like the type of logging bridge that if you went up in some of the back mountain areas of that's exactly what
Yeah.
you'd find.
Yeah. This is a bridge that I walked across when I went to school at Newton. And other ones, well.
Waddy, you was mentioning some of these huge trees. Are
Yeah.
any of those old stumps still available? Can you still see them moving green timbers?
Oh yes, you can in amongst the replanted trees.
Yeah.
All the ones
But
you
they
see
weren't-
now in the where's the aerial? What you see from the aerial photograph, for instance, that's all replanted about the early 30s. The trees that those the forest those children are going into are replanted. But the minute you get inside the forest, you will see those huge stumps, and it's one of the attractions for the children to have them explain to them how they were cut, sawn by hand. And you see the stumps that you were talking about, John,
Yeah.
and they just stand there in amazement when you explain what they are.
'Cause I
Yes,
remember
they're
as,
still there. There are lots of them in there.
I remember as a youth always wondering why these stumps they also had footholds in it, didn't
Yeah,
they? So
well,
you could
yeah.
actually walk up into the side
Well,
of it?
those were the chopping boards. They used to have a chopping board that's stuck in there and had a little steel rim around the edge of it, and then you could stick them in, and then you could move them around and keep sawing as you came along. Well, you could.
So what would you do, actually stand on those?
Yeah, we stood on the board. Yeah, they were only about 6 inches wide, the boards.
Incredible.
But some of them were 3 or 4 boards high. Those stumps. Yeah.
So you'd stand on them and that's
Yeah.
how
And then you
cut
chop a
trees.
new one up higher, about the height of a man, and then put another one in, jump on that, and chop another one if the tree was still too big.
So you basically had to go up till the tree got small enough to use your saw.
So to use the saw, right? Yeah.
Oh, I tell you, the logging companies today would go crazy. You started doing
yeah,
that.
Sure. But I guess there was lots of wood in those days.
Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
there really was, because it
But
wasn't.
they had pretty long saws. Those
Yeah.
up to 10 feet long. Some of those saws were huge.
I said, there's no real worry about that. In those days, we talk about this a plantation and
Yeah.
it's been replanted. Was there any before green timbers? Was there much replanting? Was that a worry? Was that something that they did?
Is that for me or?
For
Yeah.
either of you,
Okay,
like
well,
Okay, that
I mean,
was.
we're having we're
you-
talking. I mean, I'm not going to ask
Yeah,
questions.
you
Say,
were-
John, you answer this one.
You were there,
Okay.
John.
Yeah, okay. Well, that is the very first piece of reforestation in all of British Columbia, that little patch of ground.
Oh, you're kidding. The very first.
The very first
No.
piece of,
But you see on the air photo there.
yeah, well, that was to replace that. Now, how that got started was in all through the 1920s, there was much uproar about people, the logging companies, cutting that timber. There was, I think, more than one company but King's Mill, King's Harris Lumber Company at King's had the biggest lot of it to cut. But it was much of a protest because it was so beautiful when you can see driving through that. It was so different and so lovely. And finally, in 1928, they had the last real protest, and they went down to the city hall. A number of people in our area. My father went, and Harry Baker, and actually Harry Baker drove the Model T that hauled about a dozen guys down there. I didn't go, but when he got there, Mr. Baker said, "Oh, this is great. There's a whole bunch of people here. We'll win, and we'll win it." But when we got there, we found they got there. I wasn't there. Harry tells me this. When we got there, most of the guys that were there were all from the King's Mill, and naturally they wanted to cut the timber because they wanted the jobs. So that was the last real, and that was in 1928, 27, 28. So the timber was finished cutting in about the last part of 1929. And in 1929, the provincial government everybody was up in arms that this beautiful timber was gone, and so they set aside 1 square mile, and that's the piece that we have that's reforested now. And that was to replace this wonderful forest that was there. Now, this piece of land was to be held by the provincial government. It was never to be subdivided or change hands or cut through in any way. But you can see when you look at it, and you look at the map on it,
Snuck
and you
the
can
odd
see.
thing through it somehow,
Yeah,
yes.
they got 30 acres off. It goes to the school board down Nickel Road, and then they run that great big power line right through the middle of it. And some smart guy logged out 40 acres out of the middle of one of the quarters, and then they cut the 100th Avenue through and chopped another piece off, make it easy to get rid of. But you know, the Green Timbers Heritage Society, Waddy and Herman Schutze and their crew, they've persevered, and they've done a wonderful job in keeping this in one piece, and it's going to be a forest park, the whole thing.
Oh, I know Waddy and I know Herman as well. And
Yeah.
and when you started talking about back in '28 going down to City Hall there and getting everyone together, I thought, I was going to ask Waddy, that sounds an awful like what someone else did back in the '80s, wasn't it?
Yeah, somewhat the same, very much the same. I think that we were just 50 years too late getting in there.
Yeah, if we had Waddy's crew in our day now, that we would have had the real thing. Still.
Well, I don't know if it go that far.
We would have given it a good try.
Yeah, I'm sure you did, as I said. But it's interesting to notice that even back in those days, people appreciated the value of it,
Yes.
and really we're starting to think about timber, because we like to think that it's only in the 60s, 70s, 80s, or in the 90s that we really start thinking about the value of our timber resources and leaving some and not clearing, cutting everything out of there. But really, it had started much earlier. Even if it was just a community thing, still the community realized the value of that land.
Yeah.
So you got involved instead of cutting it. You got involved in the other half.
Planting. I wasn't had nothing to do with cutting it, but I was on the planting. Not at the very first, though. I had to go to school of all the rotten luck.
Just a young child, weren't you? Barely a babe.
Yeah.
We won't go into too much about your age.
No.
So what was the process? Number one, it was replanted. I assume that's because of the requests of the citizens of Surrey?
Yes,
Was that how it happened?
Yeah. And then in 1930, the government had set aside that block of land early in the year. And in March, well, before March, they had already started to clear 5 acres as initial plot to start to grow seedlings. Now, also, I don't know if I should mention the part about the inaugural planting or not, but
Why not? Why not?
okay, well, maybe I should leave that for you. But,
Well, I think Waddy's enjoying himself more than usual here tonight.
well, yeah.
Sorry,
These things happen.
makes for sound effect. Do you know where the inaugural plantation is on
You
here?
got it, that's right. You hold it like that,
Yeah.
and John can lean forward there. And it's not that we don't want to look at Waddy or anything.
Oh,
it's
this is
just-
great. I feel comfortable.
Okay, now we got to, Waddy, you got to angle it slightly to your left. No, not move it. Just
that
turn the
right?
angle. See, so we're going to try shooting with our center cam. Oh yeah, okay, that'll work as well.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. Okay, now.
Okay, where would this be? This is King George, and this is here, so it's right in this little corner right there.
That's over there, so it's not even in the initial part of
it's
the,
not.
of the
It's in
saved
the,
area now.
It's
No,
in
this
the
is
nursery area, isn't
This
it?
is right near the nursery area. Yeah,
Right.
it's right in the very corner, very far, right at the corner where the town line road goes across there.
And that took place in 1930?
In 1930, March the 15th, in 1930, and all the dignitaries, the premier of the province was there, and the different mayors from the local municipalities were there, and a lot of some of the forestry people, and the minister of forest at that time was there. I think his name was Cahill. Yeah,
Caverhill.
Caverhill, whatever his name was, he was there, and of course our local politician, Mr. Berry from Langley, he was there, and Mr. Pickford, the guy that was in charge of the project at Green Timbers, he was planted trees there, and I don't know who all was there, but all the dignitaries, and even Harry Baker planted the trees that were left over. Him and Oscar Anderson planted the rest of them.
That sounds no different than it would be today when
Yeah.
when you get something like that.
Yeah, sure.
All the politicians were on. But it really wasn't replanted so much with the idea of reforesting it. It was something a little different, wasn't it? It was an experimental forest.
Experimental plan, yeah. Now, as soon as the trees that they used for the inaugural planting came from Victoria, they were grown in a small nursery in Victoria, I believe, and the ones that were planted in the forest that you see now, those were actually raised in the Green Timbers nursery ourselves.
When did the actual nursery part open?
Okay, the first planting, they started in February, and they did some seed beds, just a few seed beds that same year. Now, in 1932, these trees that they planted in 1930 were big enough to be planted out in the forest, and that was the very first planting of reforestation was in 1932.
At that time, except for the inaugural planting, was the rest of the area basically a clear-cut type
Oh, it was
situation?
just clear cut, a terrible mess. It was just absolutely a disaster.
I guess that we talked about
Yeah.
poplar and that type of stuff was starting to come in, the low bushes.
Yeah, there wasn't anything like that yet. It was just raw, rotten looking. Mud and branches and treetops and everything that you could imagine was all mixed up in the dirt, and it was just hopeless.
So I guess it wasn't even what we have today, because I know most forest companies, when they replant today, do a certain minimum amount of clearing up so that you
I
can
think
get
they
into it.
do. This was terrible. Yeah, there was a man that got a contract to saw cordwood on that from that before it was forested. Right after the logs were cut, he made quite a good living for a while. Yeah.
And he just went in and picked
Yeah,
up what was
out
left.
whatever he could find. Yeah, and he had a horse and he hauled it as nearest to the road he could. The Archibald Road always was. That was there before the trees were cut, and that was the road that he used to. He cleared it. It was already there, but he had to, of course, remove the windfalls and things off it. But he saw them up for wood, and he used that as his access in and out of the forest.
So here we have this land that looks like a disaster zone, and with old tree stumps and chunks of trees, anything they didn't feel economical. And obviously they felt there was so much wood in those days. I mean, if it wasn't a good size, perfectly straight, and it was left.
That's right. Well, what was I going to say? Forgot.
Can't help it. Sorry.
No. The man that took the contract, his name was Billy Woods, that took the contract to clear that 5 acres. And they worked hard. Harry Baker and Fred Baker, Oscar Anderson and Fred Baker, they were the guys that blew all the stumps. And then Archie McCaskill, he was a man that lived down Town Line Road just beyond the Johnson, and he came with his team of horses, and they had blocks and tackle, and they pulled the stumps into a big pile and then burnt them. And they cleared a small patch, certainly to do the whole 5 acres, but they concentrated on a small area so they get some seed beds in that year. That was Mr. Pickford's priority, that we get some seeds going. And so that's what they did. And then, of course, they finished the contract, but they concentrated on getting a very small patch cleared so that...
So that was the only patch that was cleared up, though, that was cleaned up. All the rest was just left.
Yeah, it was just left, yeah.
Must have been something to plan here.
It's really disheartening when a few months before you look through it in a beautiful forest, and then you come back to this, and it's just disgusting.
Okay. I guess someone wants to talk to you. Let's go for it. Line 1, go ahead, please.
Hi, I just had a question concerning the area north of 100. That area, I just wanted to find out from, is it John Thompson there?
John Thompson or Waddy Lehman, yes, from Heritage.
Whether that was originally part of the forest, and what's happening to sort of save that area.
Okay, north of 100. We talked a little before, but was that originally part of the forest, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
John would know that.
It was, because when you look at the map of the plantations, the numbers go right up into that area.
Those are the plantation maps. You can, in the north,
there.
the northwest corner of that 40 acres, which is way up, that's plantation number 16.
Yeah,
So
and that goes
it was
into that
part of
40
it,
acres.
yeah.
It was, and you mentioned a little earlier, but maybe you should repeat. Well, what's happening? What's the future of that? At least, what does it look like now?
On October the 5th, Council passed a motion declaring that 40 acres, that northern part, as park. And it's only now subject to a public input meeting to decide modify some way the way it's going to be used, whether it's going to be all forest or perhaps parts of it could be used for something else. In any way, at any rate, the council felt it necessary to get confirmation from the public and also input from the public before finalizing the way it's to be done. And this, incidentally, I believe is going to be expanded to include other wooded areas in the Guildford area. So to tie the whole thing in together.
Okay, very good. So you're saying that, now we get back to this is my personal show tonight. I'd like to ask my viewers to phone in if you have any questions. I haven't given the plug yet so far. We're talking about green timbers tonight. We're talking with John Thompson, one of the original pioneer planters of the green timbers area, a man who has extensive knowledge of what Surrey was like back in the 1930s, a man who's worked in this area. Waddy Lehman, I'm sure that most of you know Green Timbers Heritage Society, again, talking about what's happening out there. John, as I said, getting back to my show, I'm having the conversation with you tonight, and Waddy's happier tonight than he has been for a long time sitting on my show.
Smiling.
He doesn't have to talk at all. He can just sit here and bask.
Yeah.
Okay? So you were saying that it was really a disaster when it came to replanting it. So what do you have to do? You climb over these stumps and that, and it makes you wonder how you can replant it at all?
Well, it was really quite difficult when you have your bundle of trees in your hand. They come in bundles. We had them done up in bundles of 100, and it was generally, first thing of all, it was generally in the spring when you planted them, and it's always raining. Seems like it was anyway. And you had to clear away a spot so you got down to the earth, you know, and there's a tremendous amount of rotten wood in there. We call it red pan. Not hard pan, but red pan.
Red pan, right.
And then, of course, there would be the tree tops and the stumps, and it made it very difficult, really, to plant. And we'd plant these little trees, we'd heel them in as best we could, but you run that poor little tree will never grow in there. But they did. And you look at those trees now, it's just a miracle that they have grown and taken root, and it's amazing what time will do. And when you go into the forest now, you don't find all this junk that we were looking for. When I walked in a couple of years ago, the first time for ages I've been in there, and you don't see any tops or branches or anything. It seems to have just melted into the ground somehow or
A
other.
little help, Mother Nature can heal
it's
herself,
wonderful.
but needs
Wonderful.
the help.
Yeah.
What type of trees did you mainly replant? Because again, you're talking there's a variety.
Well, we planted some hemlocks, but I would say that they were mostly fir. But in some of the damper areas, we planted hemlocks and cedars. And I don't remember planting very many spruce trees, but there may have been some that were planted. I couldn't say. I only planted in the quarter section from 144th towards Nickel Road, 140th, and then from the King George Highways south. Yeah, on that southwest quarter, I suppose it would be. Yeah.
You're telling me they planted oak?
Yeah. Well, there's one little patch of oak right on the very edge. It's on the corner of the Fraser Highway and between Townland Road and the Pacific Highway, and there's a little bridge. There was a bridge across the highway at that time, but now they have a great big culvert in there. But that was all included. That little creek is included in that patch. There's probably, I would say, there's a couple of acres of oak trees, and they were planted by Harry Baker and myself. And we were sent out to do this planting.
Did they ever tell you why they wanted you to plant oak trees?
Well, I suppose it was an experimental forest, and we didn't ask questions.
No, of course not.
We just planted trees.
You weren't just a little curious why?
No, well, trees were trees as far as we were concerned.
Gee, you're as bad as one of these loggers. huh?
Sure we are. Sure, we were getting paid real well, though. We got 30 cents an hour, man.
What to
Like,
say? I was going to ask you that, and I thought, no, that'd be impolite to ask them how much he made. That wasn't bad at all.
That
those
was
days, was
good
it?
money, boy.
It was good.
Imagine though, the gallon of gas you paid 25 cents for it, and so that was an hour of work for a gallon of gas, which is pretty high.
Yeah, that comparatively that was high, and we complain about our prices
about
now.
paying a couple of bucks, it's cheap, man.
Ooh, I'll remember that next time I fill up the old gas tank. So how long did it take to replant the whole thing?
I think that about the last planting was probably about 1936, 37. Then it was all planted, but it was divided up into small sections. The relief camps was there on that same property, and they did a lot of work in clearing off the sides of the roads and doing all
I was
sorts
going to
of
ask you
things,
that because that was during the
Yeah.
middle of the Depression. I mean, this was
Right in
not
the middle of
exactly
the
an
Depression,
affluent
yeah.
time for,
no,
for
it
the
wasn't.
people.
No, but there was a big Green Timbers relief camp there,
Mm-hmm.
and they were pretty good. There was Antonelli's, that was a neighbor down the road, and he had a contract to supply them with milk, and that was good for him. And the other growers down the flats, they sold carrots and potatoes to the relief camps. There was 2 camps on the King George Highway, and the one at Green Timbers, all in Surrey. There was the Peace Arch camp and the Sunnyside camp, and the one at Green Timbers.
Mm-hmm.
And they all had a number of single men that were housed there, and they all did different works.
Mm-hmm.
The King George Highway, by the way, was totally graded from Peace Arch right to the Nickelmackle River by hand with wheelbarrows and shovels. And it's just about the same grade. I don't think they've widened it at all, but that was all done actually by hand.
Mm-hmm.
And the logs were all burnt right on the
Was
spot
that during
there.
the same period?
Yeah, it was during the same period. That
Again,
was,
was that
yeah.
using the relief camps
That
workers?
was, yes, yeah, the King George Highway. Yeah, and then we had one here, and they did quite a bit of work around the Green Timbers. Place
Again,
itself, yeah.
that's the part of history out
Yeah.
there that would take someone like yourself, because I imagine Waddy might know some of this background about the relief camp.
camps. It was just about
Yeah.
when I was finishing high school. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's it, but it's such an interesting subject about it. I mean, there's so much involved.
Yeah.
We just think of the Green Timbers forest and the history involved with it.
You should become a consultant for Chrétien for his job creation programs.
Oh, no, we're not getting.
Now we're getting into politics.
No,
I'm not a
politics.
politician.
We're not political tonight, Waddy. We're trying to stay out of that tonight.
And my apologies.
We'll accept it this time. If you have any questions on Green Timbers, what's happening there now in the forest or in the general area, how the development's going ahead, the walkways, what's the future of it, please feel free to phone in with your questions. Well, compliments as well. I'm sure the Green Timbers Heritage Society would like to have a few of those because they put such a tremendous amount of work into it. Please feel free to phone in at 588-0441. So it ended basically in the mid to late 30s. where it
Yes,
finally finished
probably
in
it all was disposed of probably about in 38, somewhere
Mm.
around there, 38, 39. The war started in 39, and that, of course, was the end of the relief camps.
Yeah. Well, they just moved relief camps to Europe. And took the men with them.
Yeah.
What happened between that? Maybe, I don't know which would be better. What happened between that time, that 38, 39, and the period of time when the Green Timbers Heritage Society had to become involved with this and the declaration of the Heritage Forest? Who can fill me in a little bit on that?
Well, I don't know, John. Were you much up on that period? There wasn't very
Okay,
much
but
happening.
between the end of the planting?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, well, I worked the Green Timbers Forestry Service for the first time in, I think it was 1934, 35. And there would be a time in the spring when we were preparing the beds for the seeds, and that took a couple of months. We had to, in the wintertime, in January, we pulled the trees up and then prepared the soil again to replant seeds and build the seed beds. They were all built-in beds. The beds were 1 by 12 inches deep and about 24 or 30 feet long, something like that. And they were 3 feet wide, 3'6" wide. Now, when you plant the trees and they start to grow, there's you have to be careful that the heat and the moisture will cause a fungus, and they'll all what they call damp off. They just wilt at the ground level, and the whole tree, the little tree, just up half an inch, and it'll fall right down. So you have to keep them shaded, and yet you got to have the sun as well. So we, when it was a certain, I can't remember now the conditions, but the foreman come out, roll on the snow fences. They were all these racks for snow fences that were laths 4 feet wide, and they were in a stretch of about 50 feet long, 40 feet long, whatever the length of the bed was, and we'd have to roll them up, and at the end, and then we'd have to roll them all up again, and then roll them out again, according to the sunshine, for a few weeks during the early growing period, and then afterward they got tough enough that they wouldn't damp off. But if we didn't do it, you'd go out there and come back at 11 o'clock in the morning, and you see all these trees just laying right dead. just it was happened so quickly. It was
Must
very
be terribly frustrating.
yeah.
to
It
see
was
that.
very for the foreman of the thing. He had to be very much on the job, looking after that. So that would last about till May, the end of the planting. 24th of May probably be about the end of the planting of the seeds. And then I worked in the spring and then till May, and then from 36 on I worked in the Okanagan, worked in the cannery until Christmas time. So I had, between the two jobs, I was never out of work. Yeah.
Let's hold you there for a second. We got some calls we want to take here. Line 1, go ahead, please.
Yes, I was just, I have a couple of questions and I'd like to make a comment.
Sure, go ahead.
I would like to ask the gentleman, I tuned into this program a little late, but I would like to ask this gentleman with the gray hair there, how he feels about the development in the Green Timbers area. Is this conductive to the future for us, or is it taking up too much of the forest land that we planted? I imagine you planted that originally.
Yes, John did. He's one of the last of the original planters for the Green Timbers.
There was a big crew of men that did plant, you know. But
So, John, what's happening there with the roads and some of the other open areas? And this is obviously to both of you, actually. Do you feel that's damaging what's there? Is it destroying what's there, or do you think that what's there can survive with way things are going?
I think it can survive. So long as the danger is that if you make it too accessible, you get all sorts of bicycles and motorcycles, and they'll tear up the environment under the trees. And then we shouldn't cut all the small bush out either to make it into a real park, because then your birds won't like it. They like to have little low bushes and salmon berries and things like that to feed from and make their nests in. They don't like, the little birds won't live in tall trees. So
You're actually you're assuming that there will be no more infringement on the Green Timbers
Yes.
Park then.
we're quite sure that there won't be any more infringement on the park.
Oh, well, I'm glad to hear that. I remember, I believe I was somewhere around 8 years old when I saw this big skidder. We had come in from Hope, and this big machine taking the timber down. This was before they planted the area. You mentioned, though, in 1932 or 34 that you were planting. Was that for the government that you replanted that?
Yes, it was on the government property.
Who were you working for when you did the
We worked
replanting?
it for the provincial government. Our checks were for the provincial government. I'm sure it was working for them.
What year was that?
Okay, the first planting was in 1932. I wasn't one of those planters.
What
But,
year did you do your planting?
I did my planting from 1934 onward till the end of the planting. I think it was about 37 when they finished.
The one comment I wanted to make was in 1933. Well, I wasn't in Fort St. James then, but in Fort St. James there was an old ranger there by the name of Alf O'Meara, and he had been the ranger there in 1933, and they saw a little smoke up on the hill close to Stewart Lake, and he radioed headquarters, I believe would have been Prince George then, and asked if they could go and fight it. And they were told that no, there was no money for fighting fires that year. And that burnt some, I don't know how long, at least 25, maybe more than that, miles long, right from the lake shore right up to the top of the mountain. And some of the stumps, they were just, it was beautiful timber. But there wasn't any money then to fight fires. And here they were spending money on planting, which was quite a progressive thing. And it surprised me when you mentioned you've been planting then. But thanks very much. It's very interesting to listen to you. I'm going to hang up now and let someone else talk. So.
Thank you very much, caller. Good night now. Mind you, that's not unusual for the government on one hand to do different things, is it? Oh, I'm politics. I apologize back.
I accept.
Line 2, go ahead, please.
I wonder if the gentleman could tell us about the youth corps, as I call it, that worked there in the late 30s, planting trees, and the old fire tower, do you recall that, was over on the one side?
Mm-hmm.
And the two sheds, the two houses, I should say, that the front, that the young fellows helped to build. I'll hang up and maybe you could tell us something about that.
No.
Sure, go ahead, caller.
Now, are you talking about the Cape Cod houses?
Caller, you still there?
Yes.
He says, are you talking about the Cape Cod houses?
The two houses that are identical on the front.
Yeah, there was 3 originally. Originally, there were 3 built. Now, the man that built those was Billy Brown, and he lived down on the Johnson Road, just south of the Town Line Road, or 96th Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
But he was the man that built those houses.
What year was that?
No, I can't tell you. I'm not going to stick my neck out. I'll be wrong, I'm sure. But,
7 or 38, I recall, because I worked on them, but I don't remember the year myself.
no, but it would be before 38. I'm sure of that.
Not too much
Not,
before that, I
not
wouldn't
much
think,
before. Okay.
Okay, because you started in the area in 34.
Yes, I was in that area then.
Of course, you've been brought up in that area, so
Yeah.
it wasn't exactly like it was new to you.
No.
Okay, callers, anything else?
I just heard everything I need. Thank you very kindly, sir.
Okay. Good night now. Mhm. So we were trying to update what happened between the original planting and that. And you said you'd worked there and as well as the interior.
Then there was the arboretum was all planted in that time along that little ravine that comes up from the crosses the highway, the little creek that crosses the highway, and then it comes up into the forest property, and all along the bank of that there's some very exotic trees that are planted in there. Yeah, no.
Okay, there we go again.
Oh, there we
now,
go.
Now we're going to try to get these
Where are
cameras.
we?
We'll get them.
Yeah,
Got it?
Okay, there's the forestry buildings in the upper left. Yeah, that's forestry in there, isn't it?
Yeah, so where's the highway? It must be just in this part here, I'm sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's the corner. That's that new corner there. That
It's right down by the corner of the 140th and the Fraser Highway.
because 140th would be up there in that little triangle. We're going to really drive by camera crew, see, because this would be 140th here, and this would be Fraser.
Yeah.
'Cause there's the
Yeah. So it's right down in this corner then.
okay. Okay, so basically after that, it was really with a few plantings. It was basically left the way it was for a long
Yes.
period of time.
Yes, it was. While I was there, they cleared another big piece on between 140th and the ravine. Over, that would be on the west side of the plot, and then they cleared a big field up on the north from where the cottages are. There was a big field cleared there, all for the growing trees. And I don't know how many thousands they planted, but I left there in 1941 was the last year that I worked there, and I went to work in the machine shop.
And when was the last year they had trees there, planted trees there? What would that year be? The 3 years, 4
That went
years?
down till into the 60s, I think, before they started to use the greenhouses. There's that, what they call it, open root or
Yeah, bare root.
bare root,
Yeah.
bare root, bare root growing of the seedlings, as compared to the indoor growing that they do now under very controlled conditions.
And I guess we're not talking thousands of trees, are we?
Millions,
Oh, millions now.
about
Millions.
4 or 5 million.
Because at one time that was the main seeding bank for BC, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, no, there are now about 7 others, and this is a small one,
Yeah.
but it's still a production, a significant one.
What happened to the timber dairy during that period of time? Was it basically just left
Just left.
totally left? No one snuck in to pick up some winter fuel or anything along the line?
I don't know.
There's lots of other fuel around in those days.
Yeah.
It went into oblivion, I would say, for a while.
Okay, and I assume there was no attempts to take it out of the provincial hands again, etc.
No, I think the provincial government was anxious to get out of it, actually, except for the nursery. And I don't know which came first. The Surrey bought property of about the same size on Latimer Road in South Surrey, which the forestry thought would be suitable for growing seedlings. And a swap was arranged whereby they took that area in the south, and it is now an operating nursery, one of the larger ones. And Surrey got the the 3/4 of Green Timbers, like the 1/4 being what's occupied by the nursery, and the remaining 3/4 Surrey got in exchange for the property on Latimer Road.
What year would
which
that
they
be?
bought off a farmer. When was that? About 1970, I think,
yeah.
in there.
So it's
Yeah,
very
just-
recent
yeah.
history.
Quite
Yeah,
recent
quite
history,
recent
yes.
history, yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
But I think by that time, council had forgotten that there was a commitment by the provincial government that this should be kept or would be kept, treed in perpetuity. That bit of
Yeah,
history
that's-
was conveniently forgotten, it seems.
We'll update it in a moment from 1970. Let's take another call. Line 1, go ahead, please.
Yes. Unfortunately, I tuned into your program a little late, and so you're talking 1934 and beyond. But as a boy, I can remember going along the Pacific Highway in forest fires, and my memory doesn't serve me too well. To what extent did the fires take its toll of the original forests along there in the 20s?
Forest fire. Was there a forest fire
I
problem with
don't
that?
think there was a big forest fire that went through in 1925. Now that started in the slashing about somewhere in the area where the Green Timbers School is, from there and west. But it didn't touch the timbers themselves. But it was a huge fire, and it went all right through to number 10 Highway. There was 18 homes that were burnt, and our home was one of them.
But I can remember when the police would stop the traffic, and we're talking Model T Fords and so on, stop the traffic, and then you would drive along, and there would be fires right at the edge of the road, burning, and you'd have to have your headlights on and so on in the daytime. And I was just wondering, what acreage would that have taken its toll of?
Well, a fair amount of fire was burnt.
There was, I don't think any standing timber burnt, not that I know of.
Not
But
in
there
this
was an
one you're
awful lot of
referring to.
slash. There was miles and square miles of slash that would make just as much smoke and cause just much.
They did a lot of slash burning
Yeah.
after.
Oh, sure. There was.
My memory doesn't
Yeah.
serve me too well.
Yeah.
Thank
That's
you very much.
Thank you very much, caller. Good night now. We got up to the 1970s. I guess, Waddy, this is more directed towards you. And all of a sudden, Surrey has itself some lovely acreage that would make some good housing.
I might add that I think it was 1960, the corner where the Teachers Conference Center now stands, which for a period of time was the Kwantlen College campus, and before that the Douglas College campus. I think it was about 1960 that the province ceded 32 acres to the school board in that southwestern corner of Green Timbers. That's, do you know where it is, John? Can you? It's
right along. Where's
it's this part down here.
Yeah, that's it.
Actually,
right
yeah. That's the
That's the
Teachers
Variety Club
Conference
there.
Center. Variety Club is up here,
That's right.
and that's the Simon Cunningham School. And the title was given to the school board in 1960, and I think it was practically a donation, a gift, which is fine. That is about the only other thing of consequence that happened.
Well, what about the right-of-way, that BC Hydro right-of-way?
I don't know how long
It goes right through, and that takes out another great big swath out of it.
Do you know the history of that? I don't know when it was cut through.
Oh, I'm not going to say when it was cut through, but it was done a long time. But it was certainly done after this was designated as
Is
a
that right?
perpetual forest. Oh, yes.
Well, it was also cheaper then because they wouldn't have to go through any of the areas owned by anybody, so they could
Yeah,
cut through
sure,
there.
I know. Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm being caustic. Let's take another call, gentlemen. Line 1, go ahead, please.
Pardon?
Go ahead, caller, please.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, please.
Well, yes, I was just, I am very interested in the Green Timbers and the speakers there. It's very interesting indeed. And you mentioned about someone mentioned about the Cape Cod buildings. Oh, I recall very well when I was quite young, in my early teens, that might have been built in about 28 or 29, because the Green Timbers School was already built then, and we certainly took great interest in the areas around us there in Green Timbers, and I believe that those buildings were built then. about 28 or 29, before 30 anyway.
No, I'm afraid they weren't built that early because it was
John
still
was
standing.
John grew up there too.
It was still standing timber until 1930.
30, about 30, close to 30, because Green Timber School was, built then, and
Yes.
a lot of things were improving around there then.
But,
Because I went to Green Timber School, and of course I still live here in the same area.
Yeah.
So when my father bought the property in 1927, so we spent a lot of time up there watching the logging and what's going on.
That's
so
quite
I'm
true.
certainly interested, and I certainly think the history is tremendous, and Mr. Thompson and what he has given a really good. Interesting
thank you,
history
Millie.
about
That's
our
kind
Green
of you.
Timbers forestry.
He almost
I
seems
wish
to know who you are.
to late them both. Oh, you want to know who I am?
Oh, yeah, I think he already mentioned, Millie, that he knew who you were. He just had this hint.
Yes, I'm Millie Plekas.
Yes. Very good. Thank you for
Members.
calling in.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Goodbye now. Hate to rush her, but we have another call. Line 2, go ahead, please.
Yes, Richard. Very good program.
I've heard this voice before, Dick.
Yeah. Just wanted to find out, how long will Green Timbers exist before it will be turned into a housing development?
Forever.
Never?
It'll never go to housing. It's going to stay like it is.
Now, this is what we say now.
Are you
But
referring to the whole section, or the forest, or the park, or that part next to 100th, or the whole thing?
well, we're starting to edge into it, aren't we? We have been in the period, over the period of years. We have gradually edged into it. Don't you really feel that eventually it will be absorbed?
What about Stanley Park? It's not absorbed, and it's in more pressure than our place. I think ours will stand.
Or Central Park, for that matter, which is probably even a better example.
Yeah.
But don't you think eventually Stanley Park will go too? It was donated to British Columbia, to Vancouver, for a park by the Stanley family, and it was under the understanding that it remained a park. But eventually, we're starting to erode into all these natural resources. And I'm not one of these kind of people that believe in Clayoquot Sound and all the rest of it. I believe we have to log our province here. That's our main commodity, is our logging.
Mm-hmm.
We are starting to gradually eat into our little investments, like Green Timbers, Stanley Park. It's eventually going to be, not in maybe your time and my time, but don't you think in the time to come that it's going to go?
Well, we're doing our very best up till this time to keep it.
Well, I sure hope we do.
What are you going to say something?
I'd like to.
We do too.
I'd
Anyway,
like to say
Richard, a very good program. Take care.
Same to you.
Catch
Good
you
night
later.
now.
I didn't mean to butt in,
I know.
but I would say that the awareness that people have of the need for a healthy environment, etc., is one of the best assurances that Green Timbers will remain.
Mm-hmm. We were just talking about the Stanley Park and Central Park, and one I mentioned. That's really what you're looking more for, isn't it? When it comes to Green Timbers, because we talk about the trails that are going in there, and we're not looking for the proverbial developed park. I mean, it's not really a park that we're out there. I mean, because parks are relatively easy. You can build a park and you can grass a field and you can plant some trees, but you can't sort of make one of these overnight. It's not something that Green Timbers, if it were to go, it can't be replaced.
That's right. Well, I don't know about future planning. Planning is an ongoing thing. You work with what you've got. You look at the potential. You try to feel out what the public wants. I mean, as a society, we're not that fixed, that rigid. The awareness for the desire to keep green areas is very strong in our community, and we try to reflect that. We work very closely with Parks and Recreation, as you well know, and there's a lot of to and fro. Parks come up with some absolutely valid suggestions that we haven't even thought about.
We've come up with a few others too.
And a few others. Yeah. But also, over and above that, Stanley Park is not a reforested forest. In that respect, Green Timbers is unique. And also, we've got the BC Forestry Association in the Northwest Quarter, who have an established nursery, and they also have a mandate from the Minister of Forest to develop an international forest visiting center and educational program. The educational program is well underway. They've involved about 7,000 school children in their program for this year, with a budget of about $150,000 just for that one program. That's in effect now and will be expanded to include the high school grades. And then comes the Public Visitor Center, which they are actively modeling on the Portland World Forestry Center. And I think that Green Timbers has the potential to be something unique in that it reflects the history of logging, of shall we say the forest industry rather than logging, the forest industry in BC. And it is the home of the BC Forestry Association Center project. And also, so it creates a backdrop, an environment for a very strong awareness of what forestry and forests mean to BC, and also the fact that we've planted it, we've seen it grow, now we want to nurture it to keep it healthy so that we can see what people can do by way of maintaining a planted forest, not just allow it to sort of, it could die out after it gets to a certain age because perhaps we made mistakes. So we have to continue to watch it from a health point of view. Now this is a somewhat personal view, expectation. It hasn't been worked through in detail with our own organization, with parks, with the Forestry Association, and other organizations, community organizations who are interested. So that I think that Green Timbers has a potential to be something different, but no way less than Stanley Park or Central Park.
Well, I'd like to know, Waddy, have you convinced anyone to put in a parkway that's going to connect it with the end of SkyTrain yet? A nice parkway, walkway that'll connect the two?
We haven't looked in detail at that, but I think that's an interesting thing to follow up on.
I'm sure we'll. Well, we'd like to thank our guests for tonight. We've had John Thompson, one of the pioneer planters for the Green Timbers. Waddy Lehman, always a pleasure to have on from the Green Timbers Historical Society. Until next week, good night now. I'd like that for a short hour.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, both of you gentlemen, for being on.